Okay, greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's edition is going to be called Catching Phillip Brandon. And for those of you that are curious, Phillip represents the TMO and Brandon represents the council. And yes, I have been watching way too many episodes of Suits. So where do we start? Well, the inquiry has taken a pause for summer and it's not going to reconvene until the 3rd of September. So perhaps this is a good time to really just summarise what we've learned in this part of phase 1. Well, we know it took 36 minutes for a fire that started on a 4th floor kitchen to reach the top of Grenfell. And we also know that nobody checked the cladding despite warnings. It's okay. Despite warnings from the LFB in 2016 after similar fires took place in, I think it was Dubai, Russia and China. We've also heard expert testimony that the stay put policy failed at around 1:23 but stayed in place till around 2:37. Now this is over an hour later and we've got to be honest, that decision or that lack of decision to actually abandon it earlier contributed to the deaths of at least 72 people. We heard testimony from operators and firefighters who really were overwhelmed. Equipment failure, communication failure. Some of them were Googling, I'm talking about the operators now, YouTube, to find out what was going on. And whilst the inquiry is looking at London Fire Brigade, and I'm going to abbreviate to LFB, we know that they only had access to a dry riser. Now it's mandatory that tower blocks of the ilk of Grenfell have a wet riser, because without that, as we found out on that night, the LFB were unable to get high pressured water up to the top of the tower. They couldn't do their job. And despite that, we know some firefighters took some extraordinary risks with their own lives to save others. We know some climbed as high as the 20th floor trying to get access to some of the people who are trapped inside those houses, those flats. And following a report that was published around 2 weeks ago, and I think it involved something like 2,000 adults, we now know that 2/3 of the Grenfell survivors are suffering from PTSD. That's post-traumatic stress disorders. And not just first-hand survivors, we're talking about people who are involved in actually helping afterwards. But sadly right now, Grenfell has fallen off the media agenda. And if it's off the media agenda, as you'll probably notice, it's fallen off the political agenda. And so what do we have here? We have a situation where, thank you. We have a situation where traumatised families are still fighting, not only for their own causes, but also to protect the needs of those families up and down the UK who are living in tower blocks that also have flammable cladding. Morbid can make an interim recommendation now. There's no reason for him to wait 9 months, not really. And by doing so, he can actually say that flammable cladding is something that could be banned now. But the government is stalling. It says that its results and consultation is imminent. And, you know, this ain't good enough. So what next? Well, the inquiry is going to continue in September, and between October and December it's going to be taking evidence from the bereaved survivors and residents, the BSRs as they call them. This is going to take up until the end of this year. And that means really we'll be in year 2. And still, I don't think we're any closer to justice. Saying that, Morbic has published a statement a few days ago saying that phase 2 is running concurrently with phase 1, or preparation at least for phase 2 is running concurrently. Now if that's the case, who knows? We could see an early start to phase 2. And I'm sure some of you will be thinking, why does this matter? Well, I'll tell you why. Because some people, believe it or not, have actually gone to jail for Grenfell. There have been sentences for 18 months, 21 months, someone's gone to jail for 4.5 years. But no one on the phase 2 list. These are all people who are very low level criminals, fraudsters, nothing to do with Grenfell, just opportunists. And that's why it's so important that phase 2 takes place, because we need them to have their day in court. But legally there have been some interesting developments. On the 1st of November, we now know that there's going to be new guidance for the courts who are prosecuting what they call gross negligence manslaughter. And those people convicted of this crime could face a potential between 1 to 18 years in jail. See, talking about the police, last week they closed their investigation into the Grenfell site itself, and ownership of the tower reverted back to the council. Now, this created quite a stir, and thankfully the government stepped in and said, look, the council's going to have nothing to do with the site or its legacy, and we will take control. But on the closure of its forensic investigation, the police issued one of these reasonable grounds on initial assessment statements, which has led people to speculate on the possibility that the TMO, my Phillip, and the council, my Brandon, may face corporate manslaughter charges. And I would say that may is the key word here. And now I'm not playing a pun on the name of the Prime Minister, but what I am suggesting is that at least Kensington and Chelsea Council, very little has changed when it comes to corporate culture there and their ability to fail or exploit people living within their borough. You see, because where are we now when it comes to the rehousing situation? I think it's 95 out of the 204 are still living in temporary and emergency accommodation. So the good news is that this means that the council has finally made its halfway mark. That's right. Out of the 204, more than half are now finally living in permanent accommodation. But that's a year afterwards, not 3 weeks as Theresa May initially claimed, but over a year later. And I'm also aware that as this video is going out, that there's going to be a strike organised by the cleaners of the council, and that's Kensington and Chelsea, as a friend reminds me, one of the most wealthiest local authorities in Europe, because they're not paying them living wage, they're not paying them sick pay. So I don't really see much changes in corporate culture, do you? Anyway, the Brandon Shaw and the Phillip Morgan, the two names that I amalgamated in today's title of this update, come from a film that I love called Rope by Alfred Hitchock. And Brandon makes a really facetious statement talking about how certain people, the Davids of this world, just occupy space. And because they just occupy space, people are entitled to, the elite, to commit the perfect murder and get away with it. We've got to keep focused on the phase 2 list. We've got to get those people who think they've committed the perfect crime, the ones who were eating off Grenfell before the fire, through the refurbishment, even on the inquiry, through accountancy fee, legal fees, they're still making money. They still think they've committed the perfect crime. We have to stay focused on that and bringing them to justice. So I'm going to close as ever and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Revolutionary Pan-Africanism working.
Davids of this world merely occupy space, which is why he was the perfect victim for the perfect murder.